again, I didn't receive any welcoming notes, but in case there are any, I'd like to welcome you, and we'd like to ask you to stand up in case you are here for the first time. Anyone here for the first time to LIC? Anyone? No? Whose mother? Esther's mom. Hi, Esther mom. Welcome. Thank you for coming. All right. Isn't Esther from Ohio? Are you from Ohio? Okay. So you're visiting? Oh, you live in Solomon, so you're just visiting. Okay. Welcome to Dallas. Thank you for coming. Well, church, I think all of us, we have heard the news, most of us, last week. And so tonight is our last night together that we meet in this place, in this time frame. But, again, we have given an opportunity to meet on Sundays with the same kind of setup and with the same, same God, same Spirit. And so I hope that we all will be willing to come across the street, as we transition. And I know that probably for many of you here, especially those of you who have been here before I came to LIC in 2006, tonight might be maybe a little bit of a bittersweet feeling, and and because I kind of said that in my introduction, that it's kind of hard because we're going to let go of the things that we're familiar with, things that we have fallen in love with, and something that we used to, and then we're going to change into something like a transition. And so on the one hand, you feel like you're letting go of something, but on the other hand, there might be an excitement about the future because there are different opportunities. And so I feel like God gave me this illustration that I hope that many of you here can relate to, because most of us here are immigrants to this country. So in this illustration, I think, like I said, hopefully you can connect, because for what's happening to LIC right now is pretty much like when we moved from Indonesia to America. Okay, most of us were born in Indonesia, and as we were born there, we got used to, we got to know the culture, we know the language, we know the system, we got used to the food that we eat, and we like that. We have friends, we have families, you get to know the government, whatever it is, the language, so we're familiar with Indonesia, but there's a time in our life that all of you, obviously, that you chose to immigrate to America. And for whatever reason, maybe your parents moved here, or maybe because you don't like the government, or because you don't like certain things that's happening, so for whatever reason, you have chosen to move to America. And as that date comes along and you want to move to the U.S., perhaps you have this weird feeling, because on one hand, you're going to let go your familiar environment, your culture, your language, the food that you used to eat, and some of your friends, perhaps, and families. But at the same time that you're going to a land that has the reason why you came here, probably because because there's a greater opportunity here. There will be better education, better opportunities for you to have different kind of jobs. Maybe it's more secure. Maybe you enjoy that it's more safe here, and more the better government, and so on and so on. And I feel that's exactly what's going to happen for us. We're small over here. We got a culture. We used it for the last 9 years. But now we're given an opportunity to move across the street. It's like moving to America, okay, across the street, where it's a bigger government. You have a better education. You will have better opportunities to serve in so many varieties of ministries that are available there that are not available here. And but at the same time, even though you're living here, you still retain your identity. You're still, Indonesian or Chinese or whatever nationality we are, we still retain that. The same thing when we move there, we still can retain our Asianness in a sense. And so I don't see there's any difference. And most of us have made that transition. And so tonight, as my last message over here, I entitled this message, as some of you have received it, Where Do We Go From Here? Physically, we're just moving a couple hundred yards across the street. But you know what I'm talking about. LIC is in a major transition. And I want to share with you 3 important points, 3 important principles from the Bible that I believe that God has given me. This message is not from me to you, but I believe it's from God to us. And I didn't learn this from some conference that I went to or a book that I read from. It's simply because I believe this is something that I have to learn, something that I have practiced as we transition during this difficult time, for me especially. So I want to share with you what I have learned and that will help us as we go through this transition. So here's the first one that I believe that where God wants us to go. Okay, where do we go from here as we are doing this transition? And I believe that we, all of us, are willing to give these three principles a chance, and you begin to practice these three things. I believe our transition will go smoother as we move across. Number one, I believe, I want to give you an acronym, PhD. Okay, so it makes it easier. I like to do that so that it's easier for you to remember. Just think about PhD. Number one, we need to go to God through prayer. Okay, the P stands for prayer. Okay. Point number one is that we need to go to God through prayer. The first thing we need to do, we don't go to people, we don't talk to people. The first thing we need to do is this transition. We need to go to God through prayer. God himself, Jesus himself, while he was on earth, he modeled for us. He modeled for us a life of prayer. Everything he did, small or big, he started with prayers. I want to give you some examples. For instance, when he started his public ministry in Luke chapter 4, we saw here, we can read here. Then Jesus, being filled with the Holy Spirit, returned from the Jordan, was led by the Spirit into the wilderness. And of course, you know that he was tempted and for 40 days and 40 nights. And those 40 days, 40 nights, he was in prayer and fasting before he started that ministry. The same thing when he wanted to choose his 12 disciples. It says here, now it came to pass in those days that he went out to the mountain to pray and continued all night in prayer to God. And when it was day, he called his disciples to himself. And from then he chose the 12 whom he named the apostles. So again, before he chose, before we need to choose something, before we make a decision, it's very important that we need to spend time with prayer. And Jesus spent the whole night, it says there, all night he was in prayer before he chose his 12 disciples. And you may think this is big things, big events, before he started his public ministry and before he chose his 12 disciples. But here's another examples that even in small things, even in daily things, this is what he did. Take a look at this. At evening, when the sun had set, they brought to him all who were sick and those who were demon-possessed. And the whole city was gathered together at the door. Then he healed many who were sick with various diseases and cast out many demons. And he did not allow the demons to speak because they knew him. You can tell from here that Jesus had a busy night. Okay, it was evening. The sun already set, and people began to bring the sick and those who were demon-possessed. And it says here, the whole city was gathered at the door. Can you imagine the whole city? We don't know. I wonder how many, thousands of people were there. But they came there, and Jesus, I think it's safe for us to say that Jesus had a late night. Jesus had a pretty long night ministry, and he's probably wearied or tired. But take a look at the next verse. It says here, now in the morning, having risen a long while before daylight, he went out and departed to a solitary place, and there he prayed. So it was very clear that Jesus, he had a long night ministry, healing the sick, casting out demons. And most of us probably would like to sleep in the next day. Maybe most of his disciples were sleeping in the next day. But Jesus said, the Bible tells us here that early in the morning, before the sun was even rising, he got up and spent time with the Father. That was him. He wanted to make sure that what he did, what he said, and how he lived his ministry was filled with God, or God's instruction. And of course, we all know too, before he was crucified, a major turning point in his life, his final destiny actually. And it says here, then Jesus came with them to a place called Gethsemane and said to disciples, sit there while I go and pray over here. So I want you to see here the pattern of Jesus in his life, that he wants to model for us. Whether it's just a daily routine, whether it's before he make a big decision, before he have to choose something, it's always covered with prayer. And I think this is something very big for us too as a church. And so I want to encourage all of us. Where do we go from here? Number one, go to God. Go to God in prayers. Go to God on your knees, on our knees. All of us. Because what prayer does for us is, I want to say two things that I learned during this process, in this journey for myself personally. That's why I say I'm speaking this from my heart, what I've learned in especially the last 4 months, but it's longer than that too, but especially the last 4 months. What prayer does for us and why it's important is that, number one, it helps us to focus on God rather than on the circumstances. It helps us focus on God, because when we go to God, especially if we go to God earnestly, we begin to take our minds off, our eyes off from the circumstances, the trouble of the circumstances, and we begin to put it on God. And our God is a God of peace. Our God is a loving God. And that will take away our heart, our troubled heart, our confusion, our anger, our bitterness, whatever it is, and it goes into the pathway of peace. We all remember